After bidding farewell to the Reading and Northern, I made way for my Airbnb in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The town is nothing short of famous in the railroad world, and I'd been wanting to visit my whole life, so you can imagine my excitement when the first thing I saw was this incredible set of engines outside of Norfolk Southern's Juniata shops. The CNJ Heritage SD70 ACE and Yellow Bonnet SD70 ACC number 1801 made for quite a sight. I thought they just had to be a good omen for my time in Altoona. While I was based out of NS country for the next few days, I'd be exploring much more than just the Class 1. Waking up on Monday, February 6th, I intended to chase the Nittany and Bald Eagle Railroad, an iconic Shortline inhabiting the beautiful Allegheny mountain range. The railroad had brought me to Bellefonte, about an hour east of Altoona, where NBER's daily trains start and end their work. I found the engine shops on the west side of town and figured the glowing headlight to be good news. The shops sit about half a mile away from Sunnyside Yard, which meant our crew would need to run engines light in order to access the yard. I found a perfect place to sit and wait, and it was only a matter of minutes before train NBER4 came ambling around the corner. It was going to be a great day. NBER4 is a weekday turn from Bellefonte to the NS interchange in Tyrone and back, running today with a GP10 and GP8 in the attractive company paint scheme. The action was picking up quickly as yet another train announced itself while NBER4 was working the yard. This is NBER3, which would drill Sunnyside from the south while Train 4 occupied the north end. I had plans to follow NBER4 throughout the day, but hung around downtown Bellefonte in order to watch number 3 hug the Spring Creek as they assembled their train. The riverside mountain town made for an absolutely beautiful place to watch the Nittany and Bald Eagle, and I would encounter no shortage of picturesque scenes along the rest of my chase. The Nittany and Bald Eagle is one of 6 short lines owned by the North Shore Railroad Company, most of which can commonly be seen using each other's locomotives, as evidenced by NSHR GP38 number 2012. All 6 railroads are nestled in the Allegheny Mountains, with the Nittany and Bald Eagle running northeast and southwest out of Bellefonte for NS interchange points on either end. While the NBER4 runs into Tyrone on weekdays, NBER3 may either run to Lock Haven or Pleasant Gap, both of which require its locomotives to face south during switching opposite Sunnyside. This works out well for the short line, as the northwards facing Train 4 can work from the north side without the 2 crossing paths. Once Train 3 had crept back into the yard, I turned my attention towards NBER 4. The train had just snuck out of Sunnyside and was preparing to swing onto the main line at Milesburg, which meant I had to get a move on. The morning stayed beautiful as I hustled out of town, moving along State Road 220 towards my first location on the main. I set up next to a hillside cemetery and found myself pointed directly into that crisp winter's morning sun as NBER 4 quickly approached from the north. It was a pretty morning indeed, complete with the awesome sights and sounds of the iconic Shortline hustling through the mountain range. The crew had assembled a decent-sized cut of outbounds in Sunnyside and was to make excellent use of their 40-mile-an-hour track speed on the run into Tyrone. My speed limit wasn't much quicker, but I managed to squeal into the Tom Ridge Preserve before the train did. NBER bridges a crucial gap between Norfolk Southern main lines, with the Buffalo line in Lock Haven and the Pittsburgh line through Tyrone. I believe this concept accounts for most of NBER 4's consist today, likely brought in from Lock Haven by the previous Train 3 bound for Tyrone and points west via Norfolk Southern. Speaking of Tyrone, that was to be my next location as I soared over the mountains on Interstate 99. Talk about feeling on top of the world. I wanted to get to Tyrone well ahead of the Nittany and Bald Eagle, and that I did. I lit down on the town's Amtrak station, where the NS Pittsburgh line runs by on one side and the Nittany and Bald Eagle the other. This is where the two railroads meet, and where my attention had momentarily been turned in favor of the Class 1. For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to railfan the pit, and it felt totally surreal to have finally landed trackside as I was immediately greeted by an eastbound stack train. I guess I shouldn't necessarily call this one a stack train, as it had been demoted to 1 highs in order to accommodate a height-restricted reroute as a result of the East Palestine derailment. Nonetheless, the wind produced by this guy was frigid, but that's what I get for coming to Pennsylvania in February. The intermodal train is moving east after having finished its assault on the mountain, a grueling stretch of mainline that carves through the Alleghenies by way of sharp curves and steep grades. Shortly after the container train passed, I was treated to a westbound manifest, beginning their march uphill led by 2 AC-44 C6Ms rebuilt right up the road at Juniata. As the manifest lumbered west towards Altoona, the Nittany and Bald Eagle began its approach after picking up 2 boxcars from a nearby warehouse. I hopped over to the other side of the parking lot and lit up the drone, which gave me an incredible view of the train splitting Tyrone in two. The tracks drop down grade rather steeply by way of Washington Avenue, a notable stretch of street running featured in the 2010 film Unstoppable as the fictitious AVWR AC-4400s careened around the very curve Train 4 is approaching. One thing I really enjoy about rail fanning new locales is the change in culture, evidenced in Tyrone by the trademark Pennsylvania Dutch-styled architecture. The houses have now made way for the Little Juniata River, which NBER will cross over prior to swinging into Tyrone's small yard. Once arrived, the crew will perform the time-honored ritual of swapping outbounds for inbounds, all while the Pittsburgh Line Parade continues next door. Like I said, the mainline parade continues. As NBER 4 crept into the yard, I barely missed the arrival of Amtrak train PO42, which featured the railroad's Phase 1 heritage locomotive up front. The Pennsylvanian's station stop lasted all of 50 seconds, which was just barely enough time for me to run to the east side of the platform for departure. Amtrak isn't the only player hearkening back to a bygone era today, as an old spur track about 50 yards behind me displays relics of some fallen flags. Both the NBER and NS tracks date back to the Pennsylvania Railroad, with their Bald Eagle line joining the Pittsburgh line, an infamous name proudly inherited by Norfolk Southern. The Shortline had a decent amount of switching to do at the interchange, nosing out over the bridge just far enough to tease me. I was definitely excited to watch the return trip over the Little Juniata though, but first it was time for lunch. Prior to departing Wilmington, my grandpa had suggested cooking food on the hood of my car, and let me tell you, trackside sushi is in a league of its own. Lunch was incredibly enjoyable for obvious reasons, and once I had cleaned up, it was back over to the tracks for some switching action. I was quite happy to have been treated to a pair of matching Jeeps on today's chase, both of which are Conrail survivors. This is probably one of the oldest duos of locomotives I've seen in action together, with the reins now turned over to GP8 number 1601 for the return trip to Bellefonte. Operating one of the busiest and most geographically intense rail lines in North America requires constant upkeep, as evidenced today by two separate maintenance of way gangs. I was amazed that these crews managed to slip in between the bidirectional onslaught of NS trains, and thought it even cooler I got to watch them slide past the NBER. After the eastbound gang passed, it was nearing time for Train 4's departure, at which point I scurried downhill and back to the Little Juniata River. Planning is essential and plans are useless. It's a tenet I live by when chasing trains, as one can do all the research necessary to feel prepared and then stumble upon a spot like Little Juniata River that changes everything. I had intended to watch the train depart Tyrone along the uphill street running section of town, but couldn't pass up this awesome little river crossing. When scouting maps for desirable locations, I knew it was going to be a scenic chase through the Alleghenies, but nothing could prepare me for the real thing. Case in point, I was back at the Tom Ridge Preserve following Tyrone, nestled in the valley between mountaintops. Chasing the Nittany and Bald Eagle was going much better than expected. That's not to say I had low expectations, but the matching pair of old Jeeps through some incredible trackside scenery continued to blow me away. It was definitely one of the most pleasantly surprising chases I've been on. Not to be outdone is Bellefonte, where I found myself straddling the southern throat of Sunnyside Yard to my left and the Spring Creek on the right. I was initially hesitant about walking across the tracks, but this was clearly public land and was going to provide a great location for me to take in Mother Nature while I waited for my train. I noticed this little hideout earlier in the morning while watching NBER3 work Sunnyside, and was quite happy to have seen Train 4 alongside the Spring Creek. When it comes to locomotive models, I'm usually somewhat of a rivet counter, but completely missed recognizable differences between 1601 and 1804 until after the fact. In fact, I'd been wondering all day why they were in different number series, if that tells you anything about how immersed in the day's adventure I must have been. Chasing train NBER4 had certainly provided some good memories, capped off nicely as the train shoves back into Sunnyside to round out its day. After saying goodbye to Bellefonte, I made way for Lockhaven in hopes of intercepting the southbound Train 3 and found a quiet place to wait at the end of the road in Mount Eagle. After about half an hour of complete peace in the forest, I decided to make way back for Altoona, with one more stop in Bellefonte in order to see Lycoming Valley GP35R number 2016. The LV is yet another one of the North Shore companies and host to one of the best looking 4-axles I recall seeing. According to my book, the Reading-inspired paint scheme easily rivals FEC's Pink Ladies. While the Nittany and Bald Eagles seemed to have turned in for the day, I had no such plans. About 42 miles south and west of Bellefonte, I found myself in Bellwood, pulling up to Norfolk Southern's Pittsburgh Main Line once again. While not the most scenic of the nearby pit line hotspots, it is the famous triple-track main nonetheless, living up to its name as an eastbound oil train passed through town with 2 more Juniata rebuilds doing the honors. The dynamic brakes are howling as AC-44 C6Ms 4234 and 4268 work to keep their heavy train at bay as they descend into Tyrone. These oil cans are coming east out of the Dakota's Bakken oil fields, bound for export via the riverside terminals of the Delaware River. I was yet again thrilled to be trackside on the pit, although admittedly nervous that the East Palestine derailment and its consequential detours would have an effect on train traffic. There was only one way to find out, as I was more than happy to stay put long enough for the thunder of an eastbound to put a smile on my face. Just as loaded oil went down the mountain, empties were now ascending, with 2 more GEs working hard. This was merely a taste of the mountainous pit line action I would enjoy in the days following, and already I was beside myself. I was treated to one more train before darkness fell, Amtrak's westbound Pennsylvanian PO 43. I usually favor chasing trains instead of riding them, but I bet the trip over the Alleghenies is amazing. The Pennsylvanian is about 10 minutes from its Altoona station stop, and I decided to follow the train into town. I first wanted to stop by the turntable on the north side of the locomotive shops, which provides a neat look at just how sizable the Juniata facilities are. The table allows for compact entry and exit into the 20-track shop, with SW 1001 number 2103 performing the switching duties. Juniata is the only place on the NS system where you can find the 1001s, with the 2 remaining prototypes held captive as shop switchers. The railroad certainly didn't splurge on space when constructing the turntable, which is just barely long enough for the switcher's wheelbase plus that of a 6-axle. This evening's guest was yet another C6M number 4355, rebuilt from an old Dash 9 at these very shops. 2103 had sauntered into the Juniata abyss, I swung back by that special pair on the deadline. A couple other rail fans had gathered to take long exposure pictures, which meant I had an opportunity to get a decent video as well. The Jersey Girl sat here for months, right alongside Home Shop Rebuild SD70ACC number 1801, which has spent much of its rebuilt life right here. To top it all off, there was a GP60 present, making for quite a unique set of engines to be conveniently placed in public view. After poking around Altoona, I decided to end the day by exploring Bird Eye Road, an off-road trail used to reach the famous Bennington Curve. It would mark my first time driving through snow, an experience I decided was best had at night, off-road. I don't know what possessed me. It was definitely not the most intelligent decision I could have made, but that's all part of the fun. Thanks for rail fanning with me today. I hope you enjoyed my first day in the Alleghenies as much as I did.